Hi, everyone. This is Vari with Mass Support. On behalf of the peer specialist team at Mass Support, I'd like to thank you for tuning in. We'd like to share a little bit about what it's like to live with mental health issues, knowing that a lot of folks are experiencing mental health issues perhaps for the first time during the pandemic, or perhaps experiencing more challenging symptoms at this time. We'd like to let you know that you're not alone. There are options. And there are specifically people like you who are struggling or who have struggled, who are available to sit with you through this storm.
Hi, I'm Laura. It's great to meet you. So I've been working in the mental health field for a little over 10 years now, and I've been working in all different types of capacities, but I am a certified peer specialist. And what that means is that I have lived experience with different mental health challenges in my life. When I was younger, I experienced a lot of depression and anxiety, and I'm still managing those symptoms as an adult. Part of why I really love this work is because I'm able to sit with and support people who are going through similar challenges, offer some of the things that worked for me that might be helpful for them, and really just hold the space to listen to them when they might not always get that from people, right? I'm able to just listen and kind of support them in their storm in a way that someone without that lived experience may not be able to, just because they're not in a place where they can really empathize. They can sympathize with their journey, but empathy is a different feeling around things that we've experienced. Something that I really love to do in my spare time is I love to take time with my family. During the pandemic, my daughter has experienced an increase in anxiety symptoms. She's having panic attacks. They're pretty significant. And we've really been doing a lot of work around that. I feel like sometimes being a mother, it's harder to support her than it might be to support someone else who I'm supporting as a peer specialist. Just gets a little bit stickier. But I feel like so many children and so many adults are in such a similar boat right now, where we're all experiencing, potentially an increase in stress for sure, but definitely a lot of people are seeing increases in their mental health symptoms, or being completely newly diagnosed to having some sort of mental health diagnosis that they aren't weren't even experiencing prior to the pandemic. Actually, 2 in 5 United States residents at this point have expressed, significant mental health symptoms since the pandemic. So, as peer specialists, we're here to provide a different type of support during that time. And I want you all to know that, this is something that we're all experiencing and we're in it together. And however we can be supportive for you, please let us know.
Hi, everyone. My name is Gus. I have been in a peer support role for almost 7 or 8 years. Before this role, I actually was in the business world. So I worked in finance for a while, and then I worked in real estate where I did a lot of investment stuff. But I soon learned that once my mental health diagnosis started kicking in, right in the late teens, mid 20s, which is the typical range for these things to kick in for a lot of us. I was having a tough time managing that life. And despite all the money, all the success, all the everything, I was extremely unhappy. And so I took about a year off and I thought about what I wanted to do with my life. And I identified that I had a lot of survivor's guilt because I had a pretty tough upbringing. And so the peer support world was perfect because it allows me to be myself. I'm a kind of a big goof. I love helping people. We were a single parent household. I was the oldest. So I did a lot of, I was a kind of a parentified child, they like to say. And so the peer support world lets me engage in those skills. And it also helps me assuage my survivor's guilt because I get to come back and give and show what I think to be true empathy. Because I don't know who said this first, but everyone says it. And you probably can already guess what I'm going to say, but I haven't been in your shoes, but I've been in the shoe store. So I really feel that way. But a little bit about me outside of the peer support world. I love to play the guitar. I love chess. I love art. I love going to live shows. Not so much to Broadway. I will if I have to. More like ballet and like comedy shows and magic shows. Those are like my thing. I also dabble in magic a little bit. And one of my favorite things to do in the whole wide world is nothing. Sometimes that's so much fun. So I'm really happy to be here and answer some questions, and I'm with a great cast here. So I'm looking forward to this. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Verid. Last month, I celebrated 14 years in recovery, and for me, what that means is it's been 14 years since I started asking for real help and getting real help. So I had been in therapy for years on and off before that, but I was getting nowhere and taking my time with it because nobody was asking me the hard questions, and I didn't know what to ask for as far as support. And that all really came to a head around my birthday, just before my birthday, 14 years ago. And it's been sometimes uphill, sometimes downhill since then, but I've learned a lot. I have been certified as a peer support specialist originally in my home state of Connecticut several years ago now. I re-upped my certification 3 years in. You have to recertify with some CEUs in Connecticut, and I did that, and then moved to the Boston metro area. My certification was about to run out, but also Massachusetts has its own certification process, and I was very eager to get any additional content that Massachusetts might offer, sort of more specialized content as well, tailored for different state, different way of how the system works. And so I got certified a couple years ago, and I've had the opportunity to work on an ACCS team. And since last fall, I've been with Mass Support. Outside of work, I have a lot of crafty hobbies. So I usually have a good range of things to choose from depending on whatever mood strikes. I like to sew, I like to embroider, I like to draw, I like to write. I also make wire jewelry. And well, there's quite a lot to choose from. I have been volunteering in behavioral health for a long, long time. I started out by giving presentations for NAMI's In Our Own Voice program, and I did that for 8 years, and increasingly got more opportunities to speak publicly outside of that program, and that was really empowering and a really nice opportunity to, in some instances, give really important answers to really terrible questions from deeply misguided audience members, and in other instances to give some comfort and offer some validation to folks who are struggling or who are supporting folks who are struggling. And it was really nice to have the opportunity to be that person, to offer that support for folks.
Hi, everybody. My name's Christina. Very grateful to be here with you guys. Thank you for having us. I am currently an outreach crisis counselor with the program Mass Support, and I feel so honored to be working with people that speak openly about mental health and make it a priority in life. Because for me, keeping eyes on my mental health is one of the top priorities that I have. I have struggled with addiction and depression throughout my whole life, and it's a constant double job of trying to maintain what you have to do in regular life, but also take care of yourself. So that's why I'm very honored to be here with you all. I just got my first job as a peer specialist. I'll be starting in less than a month, and I'm very excited to learn more about the world, work with professionals, and, you know, make some change in any areas where I might have felt outcasted when I reached out for help. Systems aren't perfect, so I'm very happy to be able to impact it in a positive way if I can. Outside of work, I definitely like to spend time with my family, having those few select loved ones that you know care about your best interest. I love spending time with them. Yoga has really helped my mind more than I ever realized it would during the pandemic, so that's a huge priority of mine. And just meeting and learning from new and different types of people that are not like you. You're never going to grow if you don't expand your comfort zone. So I love learning new things. And most of all, I adopted this beautiful little puppy during the pandemic, and she keeps me very sane and distracted from some of my own mental difficulties sometimes. But super grateful to be here and learn and share anything that I have to offer.
Hello, everyone. Just to go over this quick slide deck. It's just going to give you guys a small, brief overview of what the peer support role could look like for the most part in most settings, and kind of what the power behind the role comes from. So we'll call it the gift of peer support, how similarities make all the difference. So what to expect? We want to go over the rationale, peer versus non-peer roles, because there is a difference, folks. The methodology behind the practice, how do we put those things into practice, the effects that we feel like they have on the people we're serving and working with, and more specifically, what the peer support role was like on the mass support team. So the rationale is that a peer specialist or peer support worker, I like to use that broader term because there's different kinds. There's people that are recovery coaches, there's people that do a lot of different things, substance use, mental health, domestic violence. So it could be a lot of different things. But the goal is that you hopefully want to employ someone who's had some sort of lived experience, someone who's kind of been through similar things that can really, when they say, hey, I get you, they mean it. Another important thing that we do is we try to model behaviors. And so, for example, I have a person I'm working with now who has lived with mom for a long time, doesn't really have a lot of those adulting skills. So we do a lot of cooking. We do a lot of like, how do I fold my clothes? It seems so simple. And then I've worked with people on much bigger, more serious goals. So it kind of depends on person to person, but the idea is that we're trying to model these behaviors. Sometimes this similarity can feel like familiarity. Did I say that word right? I'm not sure, but you guys know what I mean. And the idea is that I haven't been in your shoes, but I've been to the shoe store. So I'm hoping that perhaps some of the things I went through have brought out things in me that are, maybe they're bringing them out in you, and that I can really relate in that way to you. We like to focus on whole health. I know that the non-peer roles, they like to focus on very specific things. So your psychiatrist will focus on meds. Your social worker might focus on working on goals, housing, things like that. Your therapist might focus on working through the things that you're going through or have went through and how that affects you today and how to work with that moving forward to set yourself up to have a happier life. The peer specialist is sort of kind of a Swiss Army knife of things. We don't do those specific things to the level that they do, but we can help you in those areas in very small, concrete ways. And so a therapist might help you work through your trauma, for example, if you've gone through something horrible. And they're very adept and they've gone through lots of schooling and experience in doing that, and they're licensed. So we can't do that, right? But a peer support worker can talk to you about what triggers might look like for you and work through those triggers with you and how we can counteract them and share with you how it's affected me in good and bad ways. And hopefully we have a conversation around that that sparks something in you internally, then you take and run with and go with whoever you need to work with to get that thing going. And essentially, we are not a super traditional role. And because of that, we can be effective. Sometimes people are very leery of the system or clinicians and things like that. And so going to somebody who's like a mentor or a recovery coach or someone like that might be a lot easier for folks to ask for help from or to just get their feet wet in what we like to call recovery. So this is just some quick examples of what a peer support worker is versus non-peer. So we talked about the lived experience. The trainings are very different. The methodology is very different. Clinical methodology is very specific, evidence-based, or at least evidence-informed. They go to a lot of years of schooling for that. Ours is, our methodology is mostly based on whole health, person-centered language, worldview, and there's a ton of different trainings. There's a CPS, IPS, there's WAM, there's RAP. It's a lot of things that folks can go and study. Non-peer work of very specific goals. We're a little bit more wider in how we connect. and how we get there. Our approach is very whole health as opposed to just managing your symptoms. And we're in the system, but we're not of the system. And that's a very important distinction. And I don't mean that in a way where it's supposed to conflict with my team members. The idea is that because I'm not clinical, I add something different to the formula. Not that I'm something that is against what others are offering, because the idea is that we want to be part of the team and part of the tool set that hopefully you're using to move forward with your life. And so here are some of the methodologies. I talked a little bit about what the trainings are. The AA model is like probably the most commonly known version of peer support. If you think of AA and they sit in a circle and you have someone who's been in recovery for a long time and they have these conversations and they connect, they do one-on-one with the sponsorships and groups. That's a perfect, classic, neat example of what peer support could look like. It's very person-centered. It's a lot of self-reflection going on. We try to use our lived experience in a strategic way. So the idea is not to tell war stories. I'm not going to tell you, oh my God, like leg got blown off or something like that. The idea is that I'm going to say, oh my God, I went through something traumatic. I'm missing a limb now. And because of that, here are the struggles that I've been through, but here's how I cope with those and what's been helpful to me. And we work around that. Again, there's a lot of wiggle room in our role. We kind of have that advantage where some other roles might not. We're still mandated reporters. So if you report any risk of self-harm or harm to others, you're feeling down, you feel like you want to give up or quit, we do have to report that. But for the most part, a lot of what we talk about is very confidential. And a lot of times we don't share everything we work with you with the rest of the team. And we usually have a discussion around that before I decide what I share and what I don't with you first. The idea is that we complement what's already existing. We're not something different. We're in addition. And there's a lot of data that confirms that peer support is extremely helpful. My sister, for example, has kids with autism. She went to Facebook, found the moms with autism, children with autism group. And it's just really, it was a launch pad for her to find these other resources, and they connect and support each other. And she's had all sorts of counselors and trainings. And I got to tell you, that Facebook group did more for her individually than the other things if you look at them individually. But the idea is that all of it helps you. So where there's data, if it quacks like a duck, waddles like a duck, it's probably a duck. So how do we put this into practice? I mentioned this earlier, but we model behaviors. We, through our actions, we show you how we survive. We share tools, we share resources. We might do the thing with you. The idea is that we're in the car with you. You're still at the steering wheel, but we're in the front passenger seat with you as kind of your co-pilot. So the idea is that you're leading the goals and we're just there to kind of coach you through. We use our lived experience very strategically. We share what we've been through, hopefully that resonates with you. We like to feel dissatisfaction. This is actually my favorite one. I mean, who here isn't unhappy with some area of their life, right? For me, it's, I don't even know. I wish I was like 3 inches taller. I can't do anything about that, right? But there are some areas that I'm not fully satisfied with. And the idea is we don't want to just say, oh, that sucks. We want to say, wow, that is something that you wish you could be more satisfied in. How do we get there? And so we use that dissatisfaction to actually fuel some change in your life. And then we support you in getting there with you being the one that's driving the goal. So a lot of these goals are self-driven. It's very goal-oriented. We're always working towards something. It's tricky because it sometimes might feel like a friendship and you have to be careful to not blur that line. But the idea is that we want you to know that we're with you, but we're also getting work done. There's a lot of accountability with the role. I mean, some of us still have to track what we do. I know that some people have feelings around notes. The way I do my notes is I type up what I've done with the person for the week. They look at it, we write it up together, and we both sign it. And so I feel like that's my way of not betraying my peer support values while still being held accountable by the people that employ me to essentially document how I'm working with the person and what's going on. There's a lot of effective communication. I think peer support is probably like 50, maybe 100%, who knows, somewhere in that range, all communication. And so communication can be tricky. No one likes being told what to do. No one likes unsolicited advice. Some unhelpful help is unhelpful. And so that's something I like to allude to. So effective communication is super important. That's where most of the training comes in. And then that relationship, I mean, that relationship is everything. So that relationship my sister built with her Facebook group for other moms with autistic kids was super important. And because the relationship was there, it created space for trust to build, for that communication to happen more smoothly, and for the goal to be not only identified, but then worked on. This is a fun little thing. I think of Yoda when I think of peer support workers, because a lot of this is Jedi mind tricks. A lot of it is reframing. And the idea is that we want to see change happening. If I've been working with someone for a year and nothing's improved, sometimes I question what I could be doing better. Not that that's happened, but say it would. There's times where people are not ready to move, and you identify that and you work on smaller goals, or you work on something different. But there's always something to work on. But these special effects are very real. There's a difference between being competent in a matter and being sensitive about it. So as a man of color, not only am I competent to what the plight is for people of color, especially in a country like the US, which I love, I would die for, bleed. I was born and raised here. I'm not moving anywhere. I'm staying right here. But I also have a sensitivity to what it's like, how different things are different for me. And so that's kind of what I mean between competency versus sensitivity. That similarity versus being familiar with something. We talked about this a little bit before, but the idea is that the effect I'm having is that because we have some similar stuff, we feel familiar, there's the trust, then the work begins. And when that trust is there, we actually lower guards. It's very tough. One of the things we learn in training is we build these walls and we have these communications coming in, these thoughts. And for every 100 compliments I get, it has the same effect as one mean thing that's told to me. And so that guard is super important. We want to bring that guard down and earn that trust so that we can get those positive messages through, so that they don't get filtered out or they don't get muddled in with the stuff that stinky thinking, as I like to call it. There's a lot of implicit trust, obviously, there because of everything else that I mentioned. What it does is it opens the persons up. Now they're more willing to hear what we have to say versus just listening to someone tell you what you think, what they think you need to hear. And so that's really helpful because the idea is that we want to draw everything from the person internally. I'm not adding anything, I'm just supporting. And for me, it's hope incarnate. When I see, when I was in college, we had this alumni group. It was men of color. Seeing these men of color have families and be successful and have jobs in all types of fields and finish school. I actually got kicked out of college. So it took me 5 years to finish. And I got kicked out because of my mental health instead of being supported. And so when I see other people achieve that way, especially when they look like me, that's hope in the flesh. And so that's what peer support can be for people. Peer support on the mass support team. A lot of ways we're putting out, we use a lot what's called SPR. Some of you might be familiar with that. It's very popular throughout the country. They use it for a lot of critical events like hurricanes or things like that. This time it was a pandemic. As you can see, we're doing Zoom, right? And the idea is that we're trying to leverage these elements to enhance the connection. And we can only do that by knowing our strengths and using our experiences in ways that are very strategic. But even when we're communicating, we want to keep the language very human. So I don't say, oh, how's your bipolar today? No, I'm not going to say that. You're not a bipolar. You're a person, you're a human. I might say, hey, how are you feeling today? How's your eating? How's your sleep? How is your self-dialogue going? How are your conversations with yourself? How is it going here, there? And the idea is by using the right language and using that humanism, you're also fostering that hope. So this is a fun little quote by a guy named Cool Kid. I don't know who that guy is. But I like to say lived experiences are the fires from which pain is forged into strength, despair into hope, uncertainty into competency, and sympathy into true empathy. And the reason why I say that is because I can be sympathetic to your cause or to what you're going through, but I can't truly be empathetic unless I'm in there with you, in that trench with you, know what it's like. And so by going through these experiences, I can evolve or offer just a little bit more than what sympathy can offer, which is really great, don't get me wrong, but that true empathy can sometimes have a little extra kick to it. So I appreciate you guys listening. And that's it for me.
I mean, I was going to chime in with the little details if no one hit it. Because I don't know if there's other alternatives to the way I did it. I know one way to become a peer specialist is applying through the Kiva centers online. And from there, they'll have you, fill out an application like a regular job would be. And this is just for the training, not for an actual job. It's good to know that when you go in. So you'll do the application. They'll do maybe like a 15-minute phone interview with you. And I do know that you need letters of recommendation from at least one other peer specialist. So if you don't know any peer specialists, maybe volunteering or Googling a little what's in your community and networking with some of those people. I've heard people volunteering to get that reference when they don't know anybody going into the field.
So I would add to that the most important thing to become a peer specialist is lived experience with mental health issues, preferably also with receiving some kind of mental health services. So a lot of people go into mental health, a lot of people go into this field professionally based on experiences that they've had that they lean on. Most of the paths to doing that require that you separate yourself from your role, and they will tell you not to lean on those experiences or not to disclose to your person served. And the peer specialist role is different in that is your most important strength. We have a short training in Massachusetts right now. It's through the Kiva Center, as Christina mentioned. When I took it in Connecticut, it was through an organization in Connecticut, and some states have their own certification process in state, and some states don't have their own process. So as long as you're certified somewhere, or they might accept some of the different state certifications and not others. And then there's also a national certification process through Mental Health America. That is intended to be sort of an additional process that folks can go through. So I guess the timeline of how it works out, when I took it in Massachusetts, the expectation is that I would be in a role working as a peer specialist or actively applying for those jobs before they would give me a seat at the training. When I was in Connecticut, you had to be already certified to get those jobs. So they did not prioritize people already in those roles for seats at the training. So it works differently in different states. But in Massachusetts, it's not airtight. So it's possible to get into the training without having already a job in the field as a peer specialist. It's not terribly common, but it's possible. Generally, the route is to start applying for those jobs and get some experience and decide, is this something you want to do longer term? And then take the certification and get certified.
And another great way to get involved in the peer specialist field, if you're unsure how to begin, is to actually connect with one of your local recovery learning communities. You can start by facilitating groups with them and taking their group facilitator training. And in doing that, you get involved with people who are already doing the work, and they're able to help and guide you through that process. I know a lot of the recovery learning communities are really in tight with the Kiva Center, and they have some of their own trainings that are stepping stones that lead you towards, growing to a place where you could be ready to take the training with the Kiva Center, such as RAP or peer facilitator group trainings. Another way to do it as well is to get involved with NAMI and do things like in our own voice, like Vari had mentioned doing in her past, these are great stepping stones that are going to lead you to a place where you're ready to, move forward and start really applying for the training and have those references that you need to get into the training and have some more experience and understand some more perspective and some of the language involved in, becoming a peer specialist. For myself, I started working in a recovery learning community, which is a very neat way of working in the peer specialist field, I think. Every single person who's employed in the recovery learning community has lived experience. Some of the other roles, there's like a combination of clinicians and, counselors and peer specialists. So recovery learning community, the difference is that they're completely staffed by people with lived experience. And we get to go into the different communities and run support groups. We also provide spaces for people to drop in and get, one-on-one peer support or attend different activities within their communities. We do a lot of trying to change and influence the system to be more supportive of people that have experienced mental health challenges in their life. So it's a really great place to work, and I found it incredibly rewarding and nice, because also, as Gus was saying, that there's some documentation around different roles. We didn't have to provide that same documentation being fully staffed with peers. So that was nice to not have to worry about that aspect of things. But I find it to be a great community. There's resources in really every area of Massachusetts. You can type in recovery learning community and you're going to find one in Western Mass. You're going to find one in Merrimack Valley. You're going to find one in North Shore. So they're really anywhere, and you just sort of type in recovery learning community in a Google search in your area and something will come up.
So what's it like working as a peer support worker? Laura mentioned working in a clubhouse, and there's recovery learning centers as well, RLCs. I think for me, the most interesting is probably working in a clinical setting, like at a hospital or a residential. I'm currently at a residential, and it can be challenging because everyone has their own role, that they're all trying to achieve their own things. When you're working in a place that's more clinical, the peer specialist is kind of probably the only one on the team. You might be lucky if you have one other. There's ways that you can work around that though. We usually have these like monthly meetings where we connect with all the other peer specialists and other residentials and things like that. We support each other that way and have a community of practice. And the idea behind that is just like clinicians would, or doctors, they sit down, they go over kind of some of the things that they're doing in their work. How can they improve? We host trainings for ourselves to better ourselves. And so that's really nice to have. It really depends what setting you're in, because, in a residential, for example, you're doing a lot of one-on-one work. RLC, you might be going in the community doing groups, or you might be hosting them at a actual physical space where they can come see you. If you work on an ACCS team or a mobile team, you might get assigned a caseload of people you work with, and you make your own schedule and you drive to them, and everyone's very different. So there's a lot of room for peer support work. You can do it in shelters, you can do it in AA places. There's so many, I can't even name them all. There's so many ways to apply what you've been through and use it to be gainfully employed. But most jobs are going to be through an agency for the most part. There are other jobs that are not through agency, like nonprofits and things like that, or groups. But typically, it's a lot of fun. It has its challenges, but I wouldn't change it for the world.
Some people have asked what to expect as far as, pay when it comes to being a peer specialist. I think that's an understandably important question when you're thinking about careers and needing to make sure we can navigate our life in a healthy financial way. So I've noticed that peer roles in Massachusetts pay anywhere between $14 an hour and up to $60,000+ a year. It really depends on the different role, the agency that's providing the role, And also, you know, there are some steps that you can take within that peer specialist role to get up to those higher paying jobs. With the experience and with the knowledge and the training, you can find supervision positions, even director positions within the peer field that are going to pay at that higher range. So it's definitely a process, but there's room for growth. And certainly, you know, different companies pay, you know, sometimes significantly different rates. So make sure that if you're not getting the rate that you feel you're comfortable with, that you continue to look around and see what else is out there.
Yeah, I mean, it's not always the case, but as you go through your own journey of recovery and learning about yourself, often find that substance abuse and mental health definitely overlaps. I think, you know, you might not even have to get specific about your substance abuse disorder, maybe just sharing the feelings that came along with that and the dark places that it brought you. Because I feel like everybody can relate to a feeling versus, oh, I haven't done that drug, or, you know, but for me, at least, they're definitely co-occurring. If you don't take care of one, the other one might suffer as well. So they're both equally important to me. And focusing on your mental health definitely helps in the substance abuse realm as far as managing that as well. So very co-occurring, but just relate to people on the feelings and what you've been through for sure.
So I guess I'd like to add that we have, so I'd like to clarify that the certified peer specialist role does have room for folks to bring lived experience with addiction and substance use disorders, but it's not inherently required. So I'm certified as a peer specialist. I don't have lived experience with addiction or substances. And there, in my opinion, based on everything I've heard from folks who've taken other trainings, is that there isn't quite something comparable to peer specialists for substance use and addiction, in that there are literally dozens of ways for folks to get trained, licensed, certified to work with folks to support them around substance use and addiction. None of them explicitly require the relevant lived experience. A lot of them welcome folks, and trainings are full with folks who have lived experience, but it's not, my understanding is that it's not strictly required in order to get certified in any of the myriad trainings that are available. And so I think that's a real missed opportunity for folks with substance use and addiction to have what we have for mental health. All right, so I've just recently retaken ECPR, emotional CPR, which is a great training because it is absolutely explicitly based in lived experience as far as the curriculum and how it's taught and what it teaches for folks to lean on. But you don't have to identify as having lived experience. You don't have to be a peer specialist or looking to work based on your lived experience in that role. So the training is great for people working in mental health in more clinical roles to round themselves out a little bit. It's great for folks not working in mental health at all. One of the great things about some of the other trainings that I've taken, brief trainings, like mental health first aid and ASSIST, applied suicide intervention skills training, is that one training, I remember there was a group of librarians taking the training, because a lot of folks come looking for resources. They have a lot of homeless folks who are looking for a safe, a safe place to hang out during the day where it's not raining and it's not cold and it's not too hot. And they want to support those folks. And so they're looking for skills, and all of these trainings are open to folks regardless of whether you're working in this field or not. So I would strongly recommend emotional CPR if you can get to it. And right now during the pandemic is the best time because it's available virtually. And when it's not available virtually, it can be hard to get to because it's nationwide. And so it's a question of whether there's one near enough to you that you can get to. And that's a 12-hour training. Another thing that's available is training through the Hearing Voices Network. So there's a Hearing Voices training that's also a an even shorter training. I think it's just a few hours to sort of open folks' minds to the idea of what is it actually like to hear voices? How disorienting can it be? How difficult can it be to focus on what everybody else is also experiencing while you've got this additional stimuli that other folks aren't perceiving. I also am really interested in taking Alternatives to Suicide, which is a model based in lived experience to support folks who struggle with wanting to stay, who maybe have attempted or survived attempts. It's different from a lot of the more, so one of the things that I've noticed in all of the different trainings that I've had the opportunity to take is that there's a big difference between lived experience-based curriculum and clinician-based curriculum. Clinician-based curriculum views crisis and distress as scary, overwhelming for the person providing support. You inherently always have to do a warm handoff to some hypothetical, more competent, more prepared person who like, no matter what role you're in, there's some other person who's better prepared for it. There's this idea that we have to be scared of it, and we have to prevent it. And it's not that trauma is fun for anybody, but trauma happens. We live in an imperfect world, and some of us know that better than others. And so lived experience-based trainings really focus on holding space for folks to explore what they're going through and support them and figure out, what do you need? How can I support you? And make sure that who can I connect you with so you can continue being supported when we have to part ways. And it treats crisis and distress as an indication that change needs to happen, which means that it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity for growth. It's an opportunity for change. It's an opportunity to reconnect either with people in your life or with what's going on with you. And maybe you've been not neglecting, but sort of suppressing that because it's too much, and nobody's giving you the support that you need, or you feel that people wouldn't. So lived experience-based trainings, emotional CPR, hearing voices, alternatives to suicide, and of course CPS, certified peer specialist training.
Do you want to say something about RAP?
Yeah, thank you. So would you want to say something about RAP? I was thinking of.
Sure. Yeah. I just figured you were in the flow and maybe it'd be easier to edit. But so also there is a great training that you can actually take at your local recovery learning community. Often, sometimes there's other places that provide it, which is, again, based in lived experience, and it's called RAP. And what it really does is it allows you to get familiar with yourself and what you look like when you're kind of in your zone and you're doing well. And then you talk about some of the things that can tend to move you towards the side of when things aren't going as well, when you're starting to struggle with some of your symptoms, and identify those symptoms and really start to be intentional about identifying those symptoms. And at the end of the training, they actually guide you through the process of being able to create a really great plan for yourself, not only to hold yourself accountable so that when you start to see some of those symptoms popping up, you have a plan that you can go to and say, okay, when I start to see myself struggling and I start to sleep a little bit more, that's a really big warning sign that I'm starting to struggle with some of my depression symptoms. And I need to really hold myself accountable and make sure I'm not taking naps on a regular basis. Make sure I start adding in some of the things in my toolbox, like, helps me when I listen to music, or it helps me when I call a friend when I start to feel depressed. So we're actually adding things that help and we're taking away things that hurt. And then if there is some sort of crisis plan, there's actually a really drawn out plan for your loved one, you know, so that if I do get to a place where I'm really needing services, but I'm not aware enough to see that I need those services because I'm really struggling, you know, if it gets to that sort of emergent place, here's what I would like you to do. You know, here's the, you know, the process in which I'd like you to take to support me. That way that you're in the driver's seat no matter where you are in the process of your wellness.
There was another training that I forgot to mention earlier called TIPS, and it's trauma-informed peer support, I believe is what it's called. So there's a lot of things that, a lot of trainings that folks can look into.
That's a funny question because recovery is really a continuum. Recovery is a lifetime thing. We're all on a journey of self-improvement and growing and learning and having all sorts of setbacks. But with that being said, there is an important need for the person who wants to go into this work to be in a place where they feel like they can maintain that 10-hour, 20-hour, 40-hour work week. This job might not be physically demanding, but it's extremely mentally and emotionally demanding. If you care about the job, even more so. There's a lot of burnout that can come with the role. And it's not just the peer support workers, doctors get it, nurses, police, firefighters, clinicians. When you're helping people and you're usually helping them when they're not at their best stages in their life or they're going through things, it can be exhausting, and you're working your hardest to give them the best you got. And so the idea is that you want to be in a place where you feel like you can maintain a level of healthiness by doing the things you're already doing, having moved past a lot of the stuff that you would consider your lived experience, and then being able to realistically perform that self-care and do the things you need to do so that when you do get that burnout, that will happen, you can't avoid it, that you're prepared for that. And so I know another part of the question was, what happens if I have a quote unquote relapse or a setback or something happens or I get sick? I've had some bad experiences with this, unfortunately, for other places that I've worked with or supervisors that I've had. And so the lesson I learned, here's some peer support, the lesson I've learned is that if you can in advance build in things, which you would learn from something like REP, for example. So for example, for me, if I'm starting to notice certain things, I activate certain, well, I guess you want to call them interventions or things that I want to do. If I know that I'm going to be out and I might not be well enough to be the one that calls so that I don't get a no call, no show, I assign somebody who I know is going to find out what's going on with me, and they then communicate on my behalf. So that's just a little example of things you can do to prepare yourself should you have that relapse or that setback. And the idea is that when you're hired, I would really recommend to speak with your direct supervisor. And it might not be right away in the beginning, but really have a frank conversation to the level you feel comfortable with, saying, look, these are some of my challenges. These are some of the things that's happened to me before. This is stuff that might be tough for me. And maybe I haven't built a skill for this yet, or maybe I have, but you never know. Something might happen. I might have a death that triggers me, and then that creates a snowball effect, right? And the idea is to have that conversation in advance so that hopefully your place you work for or your direct supervisor has a good sense of what to look out for, how to best support you, and should you have that setback, what can be done in the meantime while you're away. A lot of times you'll have to get FMLA, which is a type of paperwork that allows you to miss work because of medical reason where they can't fire you because of it. They might not have to pay you, but you can't get let go just because you had a relapse or you needed to have to stay in the hospital for a week or something like that. So yes, you do have to be somewhat prepared to do the peer support role. If you can't share your lived experiences and things you've been through without crying about it or thinking about it for the next 3 days, you're probably not completely moved on from that thing yet. And so maybe don't use that. If you feel like a lot of that is what you've been through, you might not be ready. You might start in as a volunteer or doing something a little bit more light than super intense direct care. And by intense, I mean like 20, 40 hours a week of working with a caseload of 10, 15, 20 people. So that would be my advice in terms of gauging where you are at before you decide to jump in and where you want to jump in, and then preparing for the possibility or the eventuality that you might be in a place where you might have a pretty significant setback, and have those things in place so that you can contain the effects that that might have and come back even stronger when you're ready.
Great, Gus. On another sort of like flip side of that, I found that when I started working in the peer specialist field, that there was a bit of relief in some of my symptoms, because in supporting other people, I was able to step outside myself and actually see some of the progress that I'd made that maybe I was unaware of to that point, you know, sort of like, you know, pieces of other people's stories. And I would be staring across the table at someone who was struggling in similar ways that I had. And here I am in a different place with it. And then I'm able to offer and share resources that worked for me and might be helpful to them. And I think that, you know, being there for someone else in their struggles sometimes takes us out of our own for a moment, which can be, you know, in its own way therapeutic, right? To be there for someone else and not have to be thinking about our own things. And also there's some accountability with that. You know, getting out of bed on a day that's difficult can become easier if you know that you have someone waiting for you that really is relying on you being there. So there are some struggles to make sure that you're in a place to, you know, be ready to do this. But I often think that sometimes there's like that like little voice in your head saying, well, I might not be ready because like I'm not fully there. But actually being there for someone else in that way and holding space with someone else in that way can end up actually putting you in a better space when it comes to some of your mental health symptoms, and you're feeling good about yourself and you're doing something that's rewarding to you and you have a passion for, and that raises that dopamine and gives you that lift that you might not have if you hadn't have taken the leap, so to speak.
Would add to that. So I've done a lot of public speaking on being in recovery. And what I find is that there's this built-in assumption in, you know, being employed, working. There's this assumption that I'm healthy and that means I'm always healthy. I'm well, which means I'm always well. And that's just the baseline assumption for anybody who's working. And being not well enough to come into work is a bad, terrible exception that means you're doing something wrong. And working as a peer specialist, there's a built-in expectation that I'm a human being and I have limits. And there's room for me to take care of myself, which is wonderful, and everybody should have it. I know that we have a culture of, you know, hoarding sick days because we're bad workers if we use them. And as a peer support specialist, my supervisor knows that I have ongoing presenting issues that I have to take care of, and that is my responsibility and my right to prioritize. And so I see it as sort of liberating to work as a peer specialist, for it to be assumed that I'm going to have to periodically prioritize my health over, you know, being able to show up for work or having to cut back on hours sometimes, in ways that other roles across all sectors really don't have permission to do that, because there's this ableist assumption that people don't have chronic issues that they're managing.
Showing that you've struggled or are currently going through struggles and still showing up and still, you know, being a member of society, just showing the vulnerability without perfection can kind of gain some respect and trust with the client. So it can kind of be a positive in this world, where in other work areas it's not utilized like that, but I think it can gain respect in this world.
Gus in particular has mentioned that, you know, these positions can be 10 hours, 20 hours, 40 hours a week. There's a range. And that'll also depend on what setting we're working in, whether it's a clinical setting or at an RLC or at a clubhouse. Okay, so in Massachusetts, there is Massachusetts United for, wait, I have this in my notes because they had a meeting, was it this week? Massachusetts United for Connection and Healing. So they meet every month or so, over the phone or over Zoom. And it's a little difficult to have a network because there's how many of us that are certified and how many of us that are working in these roles, and then there's a certain amount of floating over from one agency to the other every once in a while, because it's hard to find a good fit, and also folks are periodically stepping away for a little breather for self-care, and so it's a little hard to have an ongoing single continued network based out of a single place. Right now we have much, and that's somewhat connected with the Kiva centers. So that's a way to get connected with them. And they're actually working on some different specific collaboratives to focus on ways to improve the way that we are included in the clinical settings and the way that our services are reimbursed through insurance. There's a lot of sort of sub questions involved in that work of, how can we support our employers so that they don't need to have notes from us, because we shouldn't be doing them as peer specialists, but the insurance requires it. And so how can we make that work better? Stuff like that. So there's no union. I think I asked a supervisor once if we had a union, and she laughed in my face and she said, "Wouldn't that be grand?" We're a new profession. We haven't been around for terribly long, and there's also a lot of disagreement on whether we should be included in clinical settings at all, because a lot of folks feel that clinical settings are bad, we shouldn't have anything to do with them. And some folks feel that clinical settings are how a lot of people are able to access us. And so that has value, and it's worth trying to make those settings work better. And so we need to work collaboratively.
I just want to say, if anyone is experiencing an increase in mental health symptoms currently right now, for yourself or for anyone that you love, it's really important to know the different resources that are available through the different peer support communities. And we've talked a lot about, recovery learning communities, clubhouses, one-on-one peer support through different local agencies that you can reach out to and either let your loved ones or even let them know that you're also experiencing additional mental health symptoms. I want you to know that you're not alone in these increased symptoms, that we're all, not in the same boat, obviously, but we're in the same storm and we're in the same sea. And it has been very common for people to have increases or even new symptoms that, they're not used to having anxiety, but maybe since the pandemic, they're having, anxiety attacks, or maybe you're wondering how to support a child or a loved one who's having increase in these symptoms. And I think it's important to note, as someone with lived experience with anxiety and depression, that sometimes just being there and holding space for them and listening actually works better than kind of telling them it's all okay, or, just get up and do an activity. Those kind of statements can feel unintentionally invalidating of the feelings that someone are feeling in the moments that they're feeling them. So holding some space and offering, recognition of how they're feeling and reflecting back, what you're hearing, can make a world of difference. And there are resources out there. There are wonderful, places to reach out to. Riverside is an amazing organization. There are other organizations in the area that that can help and support, some of these challenges. If you notice that your symptoms are continuing and they're becoming prolonged and they're starting to affect your daily life, that's the moment to start reaching out for more professional help. And again, hopefully you can gain access to some of the peer support services, because it's nice to be able to be heard by someone that understands truly a similar struggle.
I would add to that I've had a lot of parents supporting loved ones with mental health issues ask me basically for what are things that they can do. And I said the things that were most helpful for me when I was struggling and still are. Two things: time and peer support. And those two things are really hard for family members because the peer support is often something that they can't offer. And time is something that's really difficult and challenging and sometimes painful to sit with someone and not try to fix it for them. I think Laura spoke beautifully too, holding space and really listening to folks.
And I just want to say that even if it's your first time or your 100th time asking for help, that can be a really scary process, really intimidating. So if someone is at that point where they're reaching out for help, support them, don't judge them. And even if you don't have experience with it, I can't stress, don't judge them enough, because that's such a scary process.
One way to find services is to look through who's listed in your insurance provider, and to caution folks that a lot of insurance agencies specifically list folks who are retired with the wrong, are no longer working in that state, maybe have passed away, or who don't have any room in their caseload, and to specifically keep those folks on their lists so that those folks will get calls and people will get discouraged and give up the search, because we're still paying our insurance fees. But if we're not using services, then the insurance companies get to keep that money. And that's by design. And so we really have to fight for it. We really have to try hard to find somebody who's taking clients, who has the appropriate specialties, who we can afford, and who is a good match. And it's a process to find that person. And that's just what it is right now. It's not far from a perfect system, but it's the one we've got.
And in the meanwhile, I think that's when it becomes really important to know of these other resources, like your recovery learning community. And what's really good about a recovery learning community is there's no fee to that. You don't need to qualify. It's nothing that your insurance has to accept. They're not, they don't need to put their information through a billing system. They just have a grant, and it takes care of everything. So if you're struggling and you need some immediate support, reaching out to your local recovery learning community, reaching out to your local clubhouse will require some documentation, but it could be a pretty simple process as opposed to maybe finding a counselor right away. So that can be a larger process during this time where more and more people are needing these services. But remember that there's other resources that are more immediately accessible.
Yeah. And I would add that as an alternative to a hospital stay in Western Mass, there's a FIA house, which is a peer respite, which is intended as a way to either instead of going into the hospital, or maybe for folks who have gone in as a way to transition back. From what I've read, from everything I've seen, it's a really great model, and it's entirely run by people with lived experience. And in central Massachusetts, there's Karaya House, which is also a peer respite. We don't have one in Metro Boston. We don't have one in Eastern Mass at all yet. I feel like that's coming. I'd like to hope that that's something that we can work towards as a community. And those are like recovery learning communities. Those are free. There's no documentation. all you need to qualify is to be a resident of that region. There's a little bit more, but it's not remotely the same as going into a hospital for psychiatric care. Thank you again for tuning in. We hope you found some helpful tips, maybe some validation for what you're going through, and some ideas for how to reach out to support. If you're supporting a loved one who's struggling, we hope that you'll consider partnering with your loved one and figuring out what kind of support they would like, whether that's clinical options, like therapy, or maybe other alternative options like the recovery learning community in your part of the state.